Hello, class. How are you doing today? We are about to start week 3. And so last week we covered a bit of Europe and started in Greece. And hopefully, you guys learned a lot about Greece. That field journal is going to be up and ready to go out. And now we're going to move on up a little bit into the north of Europe. And we're going to head to Scotland. So this week we're going to cover Scotland, Ireland, and also France. And that's going to take up all of our lessons this week in regards to Europe and, the culture of those areas and the art. So let's start in Scotland. So those of you that know where Scotland is know that it is located above England in the United Kingdom. And Scotland has had a lot of issues with England in its past, especially in regards to its independence. So the capital of Scotland right now is Glasgow. And the instrument that I want to talk about in regard to Scotland is the Highland bagpipe. So the Highland bagpipe plays on what is called the pentatonic scale. And this means that the scale has 5 scale degrees, has 5 notes in the scale. Normally you have, 7 notes in a scale. You have do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, and then you hit do again. But the pentatonic only has 5. And that's why it has a unique sound to it. When you hear a lot of bagpipe music, it's all done in the pentatonic. Some songs that might sound familiar are Amazing Grace, da 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 da. That is meant to be played on the bagpipe, the Highland bagpipe. It is an aerophone. It's a double reed, except you do not put the reeds in your mouth. The reeds are placed inside the instrument's canter, and you would play it like this, and it's attached to a bag that is under your arm that you're squeezing. And the bagpipe comes with its own drones. The drones on the Highland bagpipes are in B flat. You'll see the large pipes in the back. Those are shooting out the drone while the melody is being played on the canter. So these instruments were made for a lot of reasons. One of them is mainly for sound. You can hear these things up to 3 miles out in the open. They're really loud. I was once an idiot, decided to try it indoor at my university in one of the practice rooms and made quite a noise in there, and everyone thought something was happening. So these are really loud. They're meant to travel. So I want you thinking about, why should this sound travel? What could they have been used for? They were used in war a lot. So think about the uses in war that this could be used for. Next thing I want to talk about is pibroch. Pibroch is the theme and variations for bagpipe music. So remember how we talked about call and response before and all these other things that you can identify music as? Well, theme and variations means that you have one theme, but every time you play that theme again, so if you have this theme here, you're going to take that theme, play it again, but you're going to add some new stuff underneath of it. So it becomes a variation of that theme. It's not the exact same thing, but it kind of sounds the same. So theme and variation is very much the way that music is done with Scotland Highland bagpipes. And that is, again, called pibroch. Some other things we're going to look at. I'm going to have you watch some videos on Scotland to see a couple things like Loch Ness. Some of you have heard about Loch Ness, which is a lake right next to the city of Inverness. And of course, you all know about the monster inside of there, the cryptid. For those that don't know what cryptid is, it's a mythical animal like Bigfoot, and they fall under the categorization of cryptozoology. So where does it come from? There's a lot of mythical energies and mythical upbringings in Scotland and a lot in that culture over there. So it's very, very, it's not surprising that something like the Loch Ness monster has risen up in the middle of Scotland. Another thing you're going to learn about is Hadrian's Wall, which is right along the border of Scotland and England. And the Hadrian's Wall is said to have been put up by Hadrian, who was a Roman general. And when the Roman Empire was trying to spread, they could go no further. They hit these barbarians, these berserkers in the north, these Scottish warriors, and they could not fight them. They did not know how to fight them, so they just built a wall to keep them out. Kind of like with China and the Huns, right? So that was Hadrian's Wall. It still stands today, not in its entirety, but it's still up there. You can go and visit it. And the last thing we're going to talk about, I'm going to have a video for you on Robert the Bruce. So Robert the Bruce was King of Scotland. He was King of Scotland from 1306 to 1329. He led Scotland during the First War of Scottish Independence. So remember, this is from England, because England was trying to take over Scotland. And so Robert was the king that did this. He actually won the Battle of Bannockburn. And basically, by winning the Battle of Bannockburn, he achieved full Scottish independence in 1328, which we know is not the case anymore. They're not totally independent. They got back under the thumb of England. But it was still a pretty big feat for this king to do. So moving on from Scotland, we're going to head right on over to Ireland. And there's a lot to learn about Ireland. It's going to take up most of our days. So Ireland, first thing you need to know is it is separated into two countries. And these are geopolitical separations. So there's no reason for them to be separated this way. It's all political. And the biggest section of this is the Republic of Ireland. And the capital of that is Dublin. And the other one is a smaller one up in the northeast section, which I'll put a map up here so you can see. And that is North Ireland, and that is of the United Kingdom. And the capital of North Ireland is Belfast. So, as I said, this is a geopolitical separation, but it wasn't just politics either. I mean, yes, a lot of it had to do with England owning Ireland or not, and so that was a huge issue, but there was also a religious factor in this as well. Basically, a lot of the people in Ireland were Roman Catholic, and the people coming from England were Protestant. And so not only were they forcing this political uprising, this political dominance over the Irish, they were also doing a religious dominance, which it was a threat to their very beliefs. So one of the things we're going to learn about is the Irish War of Independence. So this Irish War of Independence, it happened from 1919 to 1921. And one of the most famous events during this Irish War of Independence was Bloody Sunday. So Bloody Sunday happened on November 21st, 1920. And in the morning, there were 14 British intelligence officers that were assassinated in the morning by the IRA, which is the Ireland Republic Army. Okay? And these British intelligence officers were assassinated, 14 of them, in the morning. And so later that afternoon, on that same day, British troops opened fire on a crowd at a soccer match, killing 14 civilians and wounding 65. So this was the bloodiest day of the Irish Independence War, and so it became known as Bloody Sunday. The war did come to a truce in 1921 with North Ireland being created, but troubles didn't stop then. From 1922 to 1923, we had what's called the Irish Civil War, which religion played even a bigger part in this war than it did in the first one. It was a bloody war where, even though it ended in a ceasefire was given in 1923, there still resonates today. There are still times today when, especially on like anniversaries of some of the events that happen, where it's dangerous to be outside in North Ireland or near Dublin or near Belfast, right? So there are still a lot of negative feelings today in Ireland about that. So just like Scotland, Ireland has their own set of bagpipes, which are really cool. They're my favorite bagpipes. They're called the Uilleann bagpipes. Now, these Uilleann bagpipes are pretty cool because, first of all, they don't go in your mouth, but they're still an aerophone. They're still played with a double reed. It's just all done with a bag and some keys that you can press down. And it's got a nice smoother sound. It's not limited to the pentatonic scale. It can actually play most any notes, which is why when you see in movies like Braveheart, even though it was in Scotland, they did not use Highland bagpipes for the soundtrack. They used the Uilleann bagpipes because it can play so many different things and has just a pretty mystical sound. So I'm going to have you listen to some of that. And then now that we've wrapped up Scotland and Ireland, I want to talk about some of the things that they share together. So the first is that they are both Celtic. And understand that's not read Celtic. Celtic is a basketball team. It's Celtic. Celtic. Okay? So they were both Celtic cultures. Now, the Celtic culture wasn't just in Ireland and Scotland. It also went down into France, which is why we're talking about France as well today. The Celts down in France were the Gauls, and the Gauls were, the predecessor to, the people that live in France today. So all of these people were Celtic in origin, and their language was Gaelic. So Gaelic's an interesting word because it's said differently in different languages. In Scotland, it's Gaelic. In England, it's Gaelic. And in Ireland, it's Gaelic. So since the Irish are one of the few that still speak it, except for the Welsh in Wales, we're going to say Gaelic. That's going to be our pronunciation. So a little bit about the Gaelic culture that's really, really interesting, and I want you to draw some parallels to some of the other things that we've learned this year. In particular, think Japan, okay? Because the old Celtic culture had kind of a religion where they had gods, and I say gods kind of like in parentheses, because it's still debated today whether or not they were gods or just folk heroes. We don't know if they were actually gods or if they were just incredible beings. And they're called the Tuatha Dé Danann. And so the Tuatha Dé Danann are, consist of these mystical, wonderful beings like the Dagda, Brigid, and Lu, also the Morrigan. And then you have some of the enemies in there that they fought, like the Fomorians and such, that you're going to learn about. But you have these, just like the Japanese have the Shinto gods, but then you have like the folklore as well. So if you remember in Japan, we talked about the yokai and the spirits and all those things. Well, in Ireland, they have the fairy. And the fairy they're totally different than the Tuatha Dé Danann. So you have your godlike beings, and then you have your, mystical creatures. And it's really, really interesting that they have the fairy and the fae folk, as they're known, or the she. And these were not always seen as beneficial. Like, today we have little pixies, we've got little fairies and little things going around like that. And, we think, oh, they're cute little helping pixies on wings. And no, these were menacing creatures, leprechauns, banshee, nakalavi. These things were not something to be trifled with. They were known to steal babies and replace them, and so they would trick you. They were very tricky little things, and if you weren't on their good side, then you were screwed. So they were very much a scary thing that we've kind of turned into a little, girly type of entertainment. So putting all those together, there were people that were in charge of all of those things, and understanding the Fae and also understanding the Tuatha Dé Danann. And those are the Druids. So the Druids were a group of people that were trained to understand that, not just the mystical side of things, but also the political side of things. So they were trained as young children, and all of the information was passed on orally because it was too sacred to write down. So that's how the Druid circles began, and you would have been trained early on as a Druid, and you would have had to help a king or a queen and assist them in all of their rites for the gods, for the Fae folk, for the kids, getting the kids taught. You were their educator, and you also dealt with, liaison for other countries and other kings and regnates. So yes, so we spoke of the Gaul, and the Gaul were in France earlier on. So we are going to move to France, and when we're talking about France, you need to know that the capital is Paris or Paris. And a couple things I want you to know about France. I mean, I'm going to try and tell you things you probably don't already know, because you already know about the Eiffel Tower and all of that. But what I want you to know about is, their culture and what created the French culture that we know. So the first thing we need to learn about is ballet. So for those that don't know, ballet was invented in Paris, and it started in the 15th century. And it even at one point got pushed on a countrywide scale because the King Louis XIV was actually a dancer. He was known as the Sun King. And he helped push the art form into larger scopes. And that's where it started like spreading to other countries. and the such. So there were, you know, countries that didn't like France that much, and so they would actually put a ban on some of the ballet that would come in, Austria being one of them. And you know, they wanted just opera. They didn't want any dancing, no ballet. But France always pushed their ballet. It was their art form. It was something that was created them. You also have the troubadours, which were earlier than the ballet, and they were basically minstrels that went around singing songs and spinning stories. And you know, they became kind of a romantic form of music in the Middle Ages, the troubadours. So yeah, so one of the most famous of those is Josquin du Pré, and Josquin du Pré, some of his music still exists today, so I'll have you listen to some of that so you can hear what a troubadour song sounds like. Now, moving on, we need to look at some of the political culture that was in France, and you can't do that without talking about the French Revolution. So the French Revolution was from 1789 to 1799, and this was a big time, a big change actually in France. So France at that time was definitely a monarchy based, and one could say oligarchic as well. So it was an oligarchy. For those that don't know what an oligarchy is, it means that you are ruled by the rich. And so that's one thing I want you to kind of think about, because we're seeing patterns of that today in our society. Some people will say that we're an oligarchy today in the United States, that we are run by the rich and the poor get screwed. And if that's so, what are the dangers of being an oligarchy? You know, sure, we're capitalists. We claim to be capitalists. We're not full capitalists. But are we so capitalistic that we've become oligarchic is the question. Well, let's see what happened to France. In France, there was a revolution against the rich, against the political leaders at first, but then it just became against the rich in general. And one of the people that helped lead that was Maximilien Robespierre. So Maximilien Robespierre was part of the National Guard. He did organize the National Guard, and he started what was called the Reign of Terror. They don't have a start date for that because, you know, there's lots of people disputing the start date of the Reign of Terror. But the Reign of Terror was exactly that, full of terror. He came up with the saying, liberté, égalité, fraternité ou la mort, which means liberty, equality, brotherhood, or give me death. So this sounds like a very positive thing. You know, I want liberty, I want equality, I want brotherhood, or I want death. But what it became was a mantra. He would put it on their shoulders, on their soldiers' armor. It was on all of their papers. It was everywhere. And his idea of achieving this liberty and equality and brotherhood was by getting rid of the rich, getting rid of the royalty. And he did so with an instrument of death called the guillotine. And the guillotine was considered a quick, easy death, that they would just march the people up one after another and chop their heads off with the guillotine. And they would make public displays of this because people hated the rich, because the rich had been, you know, ruling over these people in a very poor way for years, The most famous story is of Marie Antoinette, who was Queen of France, and she was said to have said, let them eat cake, in regards to, oh, the people don't have bread. Well, if they don't have bread, let them eat cake, you know, to show her ignorance of, you know, how stupid she was, and she knew nothing about the poor, because, you know, only rich people had cake, so it's not like it could be just a substitute of bread. However, you know, a lot of historians will dispute that she actually never said that, which I fall into that line, that she never said that. It was actually a thing that was said, propaganda against rich and royalty, that was said far before Marie Antoinette, except they would say, well, let them eat the crusts of bread, let them eat, you know, there was always something. And so it was just one of those sayings that people would throw out, and if they wanted you to hate someone, they'd say, oh, did you hear what they said? This is what she said, so hate her. Marie Antoinette actually was into charitable causes, and actually was very thoughtful about the poor during her time. But she got caught up in this whole revolution, and she was beheaded, just like the other royalty, on the guillotine. So one last thing that we will talk about is all of this led to, you know, France as what it is today. And so I'm going to let you listen to a little bit of cafe music and a couple things from French's music today. But it's just one of those things I want you to think about, you know, this whole French Revolution, the reign of terror against the oligarchy. Because are we seeing things like that today in this country? Are we seeing memes today going out? People laugh at them, but what do they mean when they say eat the rich? What do they mean when they say tell me when the revolution starts? And at what point do people have to get so fed up with people that are rich running our country for something terrible to happen? Just like in France. So it's one of those things that's really important to think about today. So yeah, that's it. That's all we're going to learn this week. I will put the videos up, as I always do, in order for you to watch on which days. And I look forward to reading your field journals. And make sure you guys finish your tests, guys. Not everyone's finished their Africa tests, so I just need those ASAP. All right? You have a wonderful week, guys. I hope everything's well, and I hope you're staying safe. Bye.